of the boy who dropped the honey said that was a stupid thing you did. It's a world of difference between those two reactions. One said the whole boy was stupid, that one act made the person. They made literally a self out of that person. They were stupid. The other mother realized there was much more to that boy than that one act. They weren't defined by that act. They were a person who done a stupid thing. Now, psychologically, that's important, incredibly important. If you call a person a criminal, as if that's all they are, there's nothing else. If you say they're a person who's done a criminal act, you're acknowledging there's more to them than just that one or two things which they did. It's one of the reasons why people who commit crimes keep on committing them. It's because they do identify, they make themselves from that act. They literally become criminals. In the jails, I don't know if any of you have visited people in jail, in Australia, they wear a special uniform, like green prison outfit. I think in the US they wear bright orange. Whatever it is, their uniform, their clothes tell them, yes, you are a criminal. The way they're treated tells them they're a criminal. Where they stay tells them they're a criminal. Day after day, every moment of the day, it's reinforced in them they're a criminal. So they do become criminals. As long as they were treated as people. People who have done a criminal act. But people first. The crime second. Then there's an opportunity for them to pay their debts, to rehabilitate themselves, to let go of the criminal part and return to being a person. The way we look at ourselves is important, which is part of the Buddha's teaching of anatta. When we believe that we are this criminal, we actually become the criminal. One of the fundamental stories, which I use very often, I learned when I was a school teacher. It was the example, or the experiment which was done in the UK, it must have been about 40 years ago now. They had streaming in the schools, like Class A, B, C, D, and that sort of stuff. In one school, there were 2 classes of the same year. So, at the end of the year, they gave an examination to all the children of that year, some 60 children. However, usually they would publish the results. This time they didn't. The head mistress, the principal, and 2 psychologists were the only ones who knew what the real results were. But the head mistress, she split the classes. The child who came first went into the same class as the children who came 4th and 5th, 8th and 9th, 12th and 13th, and so on. The children who came 2nd and 3rd went in the same class as the ones who came 6th and 7th, 10th and 11th, 14th and 15th. They split the classes up as evenly as they possibly could. And they chose teachers for the next year who they thought had equal ability, classes with equal amenities. They made everything as equal as possible, trying to split the classes up evenly. They only made one difference between those 2 classes, and it was they called one Class A and the other one Class B. That's all. And of course, the parents assumed, just as the children, even the teachers assumed, that the children in Class A were chosen as the top half from those exams, and the children in Class B were the ones who came in the bottom half. The point was, though, they were absolutely even. But because the parents thought that, they reinforced that message. Some of the children went into Class A and they said, well, I don't know how you've done this, you've been very lazy, but well done, here's some extra pocket money. You have a few extra video games as well. The children in Class B said, I know you've been working hard, but it's not good enough. Work harder, do more homework, get extra tuition. Because they thought, because their child was in Class B, they thought they failed. Even the teachers they taught Class A kids and Class B kids differently. And the children themselves believed, if they were in Class B, that they were the bottom half. Class A was the top half. And after 1 year of conditioning, when they gave them the next exam at the end of the next year, the children in Class A did so much better than those in Class B. In fact, they did just as you would expect if they had have been the top half from the year before. Literally, they became Class A children, and the other half literally became Class B children. It was a very telling and chilling result. To become a Class A child, you just need to have it reinforced for 1 whole year. It's nothing to do with your ability. To become a Class B child, you just have to have it reinforced, that's all. And you become a Class B kid. So now you understand why that child in the supermarket, you stupid child, you stupid child. You become a stupid child. Someone in jail, you criminal, you criminal, you become a criminal. Or you meditators who think you're a nodder. You're not a nodder, you're a meditator who nods sometimes. Otherwise you always become a nodder. So if you say to me, I can't meditate, I say, you are just a person who hasn't meditated yet. So be careful just how we make these selves out of our beliefs. I've got a big nose. If you think like that, you are a big nose person. And in life by not understanding anatta. Whatever you've done in your life, you are not that act. If you've done something terrible, if you've abused someone, you are not an abuser. You're a person who's done something terrible, but you are not that terrible act. You're more than that. Now you understand how you can have forgiveness in life. Forgiveness is seeing you much more than that fault we've done in our life, which means that because you've got much more than that, you can free yourself. How many people get really guilty and they become that guilt so they can't sleep at night? All the time they're thinking about that thing they've done. How can we become free of that? You've actually literally built a self out of that terrible thing. And because you've done that, sometimes you can't sleep. When I was counselling this lady who was dying of cancer, I was counselling her for many weeks. And one day I asked her, she was only about a month or so to go before she died, I said, what's the worst thing you've ever done in your life? And she said, well, I don't know if I can tell you that. I said, come on, tell me. And I said, I wouldn't tell anybody else, but actually I've told thousands of people. I'm sure she wouldn't mind, because it's a great story. So what's the worst thing you've ever done in your whole life? She must have been about 70 years of age. And then she looked at me and said, okay. So once, she said, once I kissed another woman's husband. Is that all? And I thought, if that's the worst thing you've ever done in your whole life, that's not that bad. She only kissed once another woman's husband. And I thought, if that's the worst you've done, that's pretty good. Has anyone else done worse than that? But the point was, because she never told anybody, because she had never confessed, because she hid it in herself, she suffered immensely because of that. It went all out of proportion. That's what sometimes does, where you can make such a big self of these things that can actually cripple our whole lives. It's great telling other people these things, especially telling a monk, because I can use it as blackmail to make funds for my monastery. No, I never do things like that. Never do things like that. But the point is that sometimes, why do we bother with these things? Can't we think we're more than those things? You're more than your body. You're more than your mistakes in life. So exactly who are you? Are you the criminal? Are you the good person? Are you the yogi? Or are you the lay person? Are you the monk? When we let go of those identifications, it's amazing, we can be free. Okay, we've got a big nose, but that's not all that we are. We made a mistake, but we're more than that. We can be free, we can move on, if we know we're much more. In particular, when you realize you're not your body, you will never be afraid of sickness and death again. Your body gets sick, your body may get cancer, but not you. You are more than that cancer. If I'm not right, when you die, you can come and send your ghost to me and haunt me and say, Ajahn Brahm, you were wrong. And I say, no, I'm not. The point is that why do we worry so much about this body? You are not your possessions. You are not these things, but sometimes people think they are these possessions. They get very worried that the possessions are being taken away from them, especially when you die. So I say all fear is when we attach, which means there's a self in here, thinking that those things define you. Every now and again, being a monk, I meet some very interesting people. On this one occasion, I was giving a meditation class in Sydney. This meditation class was in a very, very expensive part of Sydney. I think it was in Double Bay. And as I was giving the talk, this lady was actually looking at me. She was leering at me. Hey, hey, she was saying with her eyes. I thought, what's she on about? So I just carried on just giving a talk. And afterwards she got very upset at me. And the reason was that she was actually a famous television star. Everybody in Australia knew her, except me, because I don't watch TV. And she was so upset that I never recognized her. When you become famous, it's like that. People get very, very upset if you don't recognize them. This was a true story. It was recorded in the newspaper. The first George Bush, when he went to England, the first time after he'd been elected as President of the United States, he went to a cocktail party, some reception in London, and this woman came up to him, said hello, and said, who are you? He said, I'm George Bush, the President of the United States. He said, oh, come on. But I am. Oh, no, you're not. Don't give me that. And he was. He got very upset. Because that's called pride. When we attach to thinking we are the President of the United States, or we are the beautiful woman, or we are the great monk, or we are whatever. You're not those things. Those are temporary roles we play. So at the very least, can we let go of these things? When you stop trying to make this self, this personality, this person who you think you are, then actually you can be somebody different. You can make a mistake every now and again. Why is it that we hide our mistakes? We don't allow ourselves to make mistakes. We're afraid of mistakes. It's because of pride. We think, I'm the person who doesn't make mistakes. In my monastery we have a rule. It's allowable to make mistakes. Hands up if there's anyone in here who has never made a mistake. Anyone who puts your hands up, that's another mistake you just made. Why is it that we don't want to admit our mistakes? This pride again. It's great to be able to admit your mistakes. It's just so freeing. Once, I hope you haven't read this story in my book. It's a story of the hammer. Many years ago, when I was walking in my monastery, I found a hammer laying out in the grass getting rusty. It had probably been out there for many days. Now I think many of you know in a Buddhist monastery everything we get is donated. It comes from people like you who, because of your faith and inspiration, you decide, oh, the monks are building a monastery. Here's a hammer, here's a trowel, here's some nails, here's some wood. So you can help us build a monastery. And some of my disciples were not wealthy at all. Sometimes they literally had to save up for weeks to buy a hammer for us. So one of our understood rules, if anyone gives you something, you have to respect it, care for it, look after it. Just because you didn't, buy that hammer, it doesn't mean you just leave it around in the bush to get rusty. I thought that these monks in my monastery need to learn a lesson about caring for the gifts of the faithful lay people. It's hard to get money. You work very, very hard. And you give some things to monks and they just leave them around as if they're not worth anything. And so I called a meeting of all the monks. And it's not one of the jokey talks. I really blasted my monks. And I told them about responsibility. If you're going to live on the charity of others, you've got to look after those things. And actually that no one laughed on that talk. Instead, everyone was sitting bolt upright. Many of the monks were white. I really let them have it. But when I'd finished admonishing them, I thought at least one of those monks, the one responsible, would put up their hand and say sorry. I thought maybe I'd admonished them too hard and they were afraid. But I thought, no, that's no excuse. And I left that hall despondent. I'd lost my faith in my fellow monks. Why couldn't the perpetrator, confess? I wouldn't have done anything wrong. I told them off, but at least they confessed. I'd have forgiven them. But the fact they never did confess, that's what really hurt. You thought at least out of trust and faith that somebody would actually own up. And so that was one of the most depressing times, leaving that hall. Thinking that I couldn't trust my monks anymore. But as I went outside the hall, it was only 2 or 3 steps after I'd gone out, I started feeling even worse. Because I suddenly remembered who had left that hammer out in the grass. You got it was me. I'd completely forgotten. And even when I was blasting other people for leaving the hammer out there, I still couldn't remember it was me. And so it was one of the most embarrassing times of my life as a monk. I had to go back in that hall, tell the monks to sit down, and sort of confess a double mistake. First for leaving the hammer out and for telling them off for doing it. But I laugh, and so it's a big deal. I confess it every time I tell that story. I made a mistake. Isn't it wonderful to confess it and have it out in the open? You feel so free. The point is, there's nothing wrong with making mistakes. Don't be so proud. If you made a mistake to your wife, tell her. If a wife made a mistake to the husband, tell her and ask for forgiveness. Sorry, don't be proud. Don't have this ego business. If you have an ego business, you always get into trouble. There was this doctor in Australia some years ago. Doctors in Australia earn a lot of money. The specialists, maybe 10 or 15 minutes consultation, I don't know how many, $1,000 or something. Incredible amount of money. Because there's only few of them. So sometimes they don't know how to spend their money. So this doctor bought this huge, big, powerful Ferrari in Sydney. It's a waste of time having a powerful sports car if you can't drive it fast. And the problem is that in the cities, just like probably in PJKL, there's too many policemen. So the only thing he could do was, one of the nice things about Australia, there's many open areas in the country, and there's very few policemen out there. So he drove very carefully outside of the metropolitan areas, outside of the suburbs. And when he was in the open countryside, he put his foot on the accelerator and roared the engine, and he started speeding, way above the speed limits. But hey, he'd earned this car. He was having fun, and why not? But as he was speeding around making all this terrible noise in this quiet countryside, he spied a farmer out the side of his eye. And the farmer shouted at him, "Pig!" And he thought, who's he to call me a pig? I've got a right to drive. It's a free country. So he turned around and shouted back at the farmer, "Who are you calling a pig?" In those few seconds, he drove into a pig in the middle of the road.